The great house on the hill stood as a monument to silence and shadow. It was a place where sunlight feared to tread, its windows perpetually shuttered against the world, its many rooms holding their breath. This was the home of Lorenzo, a man whose name was spoken in whispers across the city, a man who commanded armies of fear and whose word was law in the underworld. But within the cold, marble walls of his own fortress, he was powerless. The silence of the house was not peaceful, it was a heavy, waiting silence, a void that was perpetually, painfully, broken. The sound came from upstairs, a small room at the end of a long, dark hallway. It was the sound of a baby, his son, Gabriel. It was not the healthy, robust cry of a child seeking attention, but a weak, miserable wail that spoke of a deep, unending sorrow. It was a sound that had driven away 3 nurses and 2 maids in as many weeks. It was a sound that clawed at Lorenzo's soul, a constant, piercing reminder of everything he had lost. His beloved wife, Chiara, was gone. Her life had ended in the very room where his sons began, a cruel trade that Lorenzo's heart could not accept. Every cry from little Gabrielle was an echo of that terrible day, a fresh accusation. He could not look at the baby without seeing her, without feeling the crushing weight of his grief and a confusing, bitter anger. How could this tiny, helpless creature be the cause of such devastation? He provided everything money could buy, imported formula, the softest linens, hand-carved cribs, yet the child continued to weep, a living monument to his failure. Tonight, the crying was worse than ever. It seeped under the door of his study, a room thick with cigar smoke and the scent of old leather, where Lorenzo sat staring at papers that meant nothing. He slammed his fist on the desk, the inkwell rattling. The sound was a relentless drill in his skull. He was a man who could silence a rival with a single look, who could make grown men tremble, but he could not silence his own infant son. The helplessness was a poison in his veins. He stormed out of the study and took the stairs 2 at a time, his heavy footsteps echoing like thunder. He threw open the door to the nursery. The temporary nurse, a flustered woman with tired eyes, was frantically trying to rock the screaming bundle in her arms. "He will not take the bottle, sir," she stammered, her voice trembling under his glare. "I have tried everything." "Get out," Lorenzo growled, his voice low and dangerous. The woman didn't need to be told twice. She practically fled the room, leaving him alone with the source of his torment. He stood over the crib, a giant looking down at the tiny, red-faced infant. Gabriel's little fists were clenched, his face screwed up in despair. Lorenzo did not pick him up. He just stared, his own heart a knot of stone. This was his heir. This weeping, helpless thing. He felt a profound and terrifying distance, a chasm that love could not cross, only grief and regret. He was failing him. He was failing Chiara. The thought was unbearable. Just then, his most trusted man, Matteo, appeared at the doorway. "Boss," he said cautiously. "There is a new one. For the maid position. She is waiting downstairs." Lorenzo didn't even turn. "Send her away. They are all useless." "The others have all run off, Lorenzo," Matteo said, a rare note of concern in his voice. "We have no one else to tend to the house, or the child." A fresh, particularly piercing wail erupted from the crib. Lorenzo squeezed his eyes shut, defeated. "Fine," he barked. "Let her try. Let her see what she is up against." He marched downstairs, the baby's cries following him, and entered the grand foyer. There, standing quietly by the door, was a young woman. She was not what he expected. She was not dressed in fine clothes, but her simple dress was clean and neat. She did not look at the floor in fear, but held her head with a quiet dignity, her hands clasped in front of her. Her name was Isabella. Before he could speak, another wave of crying washed down from upstairs. Lorenzo threw his hands up in the air, his composure finally shattering. "Do you hear that?" he roared, his voice filling the vast space. "That is all he does. Day and night. Can you make it stop? Can anyone make it stop?" Isabella did not flinch. She did not cower. She looked at him, not at the powerful and feared man, but at a father drowning in sorrow. Without a word, she moved. She did not wait for his permission. She walked past him, her steps quiet but sure, and ascended the staircase. Confused and angry, Lorenzo followed her. She went straight to the nursery, to the crib where Gabriel lay, his voice growing hoarse from his efforts. Isabella leaned over and gently, so gently, gathered the screaming baby into her arms. She did not jostle him or rock him frantically. She simply held him close against her chest, one hand supporting his head, the other cradling his body. She began to hum, a soft, tuneless melody that was more a vibration of comfort than a song. She turned her back to the imposing figure in the doorway, creating a small, private world for herself and the child. Lorenzo watched, his anger cooling into a stunned silence. The change did not happen all at once, but gradually, the frantic screams softened into hiccuping sobs, then into quiet, shuddering breaths. The tiny, tense body relaxed against Isabella's shoulder. She picked up the discarded bottle, tested the milk on her wrist, and offered it. The baby, Gabrielle, took it, drinking hungrily, his eyes fixed on her face. Only then did Isabella turn to face Lorenzo. The evening light from the hallway window cast a soft glow around her. In her arms, his son was quiet, finally at peace. She looked at Lorenzo, her eyes filled not with triumph, but with a profound and gentle understanding. She saw the tired, broken man behind the boss's glare. She leaned forward slightly, her voice a whisper so soft it was almost carried away on the still air, yet it reached him with the force of a truth he had been waiting a lifetime to hear. "Need me?" The silence that settled over the great house after Isabella's arrival was not the same heavy, suffocating silence that had plagued it before. This new quiet was a gentle, living thing, a blanket of peace that softened the edges of the grand, gloomy rooms. For the first time since Chiara's passing, the mansion did not feel like a tomb, but like a building that was slowly, tentatively, learning how to breathe again. The change did not happen with loud proclamations or sudden shifts, but with the slow, steady rhythm of a healing heart, one quiet day at a time. Isabella moved through the halls like a soft light. Her first and most sacred duty was to Gabrielle. She established a routine of gentle care, her hands always sure and her voice always calm. She learned the specific hunger cry from the tired cry, the sound of discomfort from the sound of simple loneliness. She would feed him, his tiny hands clutching at the bottle as he gazed up at her with wide, trusting eyes. After his meals, she would walk with him, showing him the world outside the windows, the swaying branches of the trees, the clouds drifting past, the occasional bird. She would speak to him in a soft, conversational tone, telling him about the sky and the sun, her words painting a picture of a world that was not frightening, but full of gentle wonders. And sometimes, in the deepest quiet of the afternoon, she would sit in a chair by the window, holding the now sleeping baby against her chest, and she would pray. Her prayers were not loud, but whispered words of gratitude for his health, pleas for his future happiness, and blessings for his father's troubled heart. Lorenzo observed this transformation from a distance, a silent and confused spectator in his own home. He was a man accustomed to commanding outcomes, to forcing his will upon the world through strength and intimidation. This quiet, patient form of power was entirely foreign to him. He would often pause outside the nursery door, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, and simply watch. He watched as Isabella's mere presence could calm a brewing storm in his son. He saw the way Gabrielle's eyes would follow her around the room, a look of pure, uncomplicated adoration on his little face. It was a look the boy had never once given to him. Lorenzo felt a strange, aching emotion growing in his chest, something he could not name. It was not the sharp pain of grief, nor the cold burn of anger. It was a softer feeling, a mixture of wonder, gratitude, and a deep, gnawing sense of his own failure. Driven by this strange new curiosity, Lorenzo began to venture out of his study more often. He would find reasons to be in the same room as Isabella and the baby. He would ask pointless questions about the household supplies just to hear her calm, measured responses. He noticed that she had begun to open the heavy velvet curtains that had been drawn shut for months. Sunlight, long a stranger to the mansion, now streamed in, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air and warming the cold marble floors. The dark, oppressive atmosphere began to recede, chased away by the simple, persistent act of letting the light in. One evening, he wandered into the sitting room and found Isabella there with Gabrielle. She was not playing with him, but reading to him from a small, well-worn book she carried in her apron pocket. It was a Bible. Lorenzo felt a familiar, cold bitterness rise in his throat. He stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. "Why do you read him that?" he asked, his voice harsher than he intended. "Do you think God listens to the prayers of a child? He took my wife. He took his mother. What comfort is there in that?" Isabella looked up, her expression not one of offense or fear, but of a deep, patient sadness. She closed the book gently, keeping a finger marked on the page. She did not stand, but met his gaze from where she sat, the sleeping baby a peaceful weight in her arms. "He also gave you your son," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet every word clear in the quiet room. "He gave you a piece of her to cherish and protect. And he never leaves us, sir. Even in our deepest sadness, he is there. We just have to stop being too angry to see him." Her words struck Lorenzo with the force of a physical blow. They did not dismiss his pain, they acknowledged it, but reframed it in a way he had never considered. He had been so consumed by what was taken that he had become blind to what was given. He looked at Gabrielle, truly looked at him, and for the first time, he did not just see the cause of his loss, but a living, breathing gift from the wife he had loved so dearly. He had no answer for Isabella. He simply turned and walked away, her quiet words echoing in the vast, newly silent spaces of his mind. The world outside, however, was not so easily changed. A few days later, his right-hand man, Matteo, found him in his study. Matteo's usual calm demeanor was frayed with worry. "Lorenzo," he began, choosing his words carefully. "The men, they are talking." Lorenzo looked up from his ledger, his brow furrowed. "Talking about what?" "About her. The maid. They say the great Lorenzo has gone soft. They see the lights on in the house at night. They hear the baby is quiet. They say your heart is no longer in your work, that a woman's gentle hand has weakened your resolve." Matteo leaned forward, his voice dropping. "In our world, a whisper of weakness is a dangerous thing. It invites challenges. It invites knives in the dark." Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, the old instincts rising. For so long, his reputation had been his armor, his fearsome presence his greatest weapon. The idea that it was being eroded by something as simple as sunlight and quiet nursery rhymes was both insulting and terrifying. The path of power was clear: reassert his dominance, prove his strength, and perhaps, send Isabella away to silence the whispers. It was the safe choice, the choice that protected his empire. But then he thought of the alternative path. He thought of coming home to a dark, silent house. He thought of the return of that hopeless, endless crying. He thought of Isabella's quiet faith and the way his son's face lit up when she entered a room. He thought of her words, "We just have to stop being too angry to see him." The peace she had brought was a fragile thing, but it was real. It was more real than any fear he had ever commanded. The choice before him was no longer just about a maid, it was a choice between two different worlds, two different kinds of strength. He looked at Matteo, and for the first time, the desire to protect the light in his home felt stronger than the need to command the darkness outside. He gave no orders. He simply said, "Let them talk," and turned his gaze back to the window, watching a beam of sunlight trace a path across his dusty desk. The change in Lorenzo was as gradual and profound as the changing of a season. The harsh winter of his grief did not vanish in a single day, but a slow, persistent thaw had begun. The mansion, once a fortress against the world, now felt like a home he was eager to return to. His business, the source of his power and wealth, began to feel like a distant, unpleasant chore. The ledgers in his study gathered a fine layer of dust, and the meetings with his men grew shorter, his patience for their grim world wearing thin. His thoughts were no longer occupied with territories and debts, but with the simple, domestic scene he knew was unfolding just rooms away. The sound of Isabella's quiet humming as she worked, the soft gurgle of Gabrielle's laughter, these were the sounds that now held his attention, the treasures he found himself hoarding in his heart. He found himself seeking her out, not with commands, but with conversation. He began asking about her life before she came to his door, and she spoke of a simple childhood, of a faith that had been her anchor through hardship, of losing her own parents and having to make her own way in the world. She spoke without self-pity, with a strength that was quiet yet unbreakable. In turn, he found himself telling her about Chiara. He spoke of her kindness, her laughter that could light up a room, the way she had always seen the good in him, a goodness he himself had never believed was there. He did not speak of his work, and she never asked, a silent understanding existing between them that some shadows were best left undisturbed for now. One afternoon, he found her in the garden, sitting on a stone bench with Gabrielle, who was now sitting up on his own, clumsily patting the petals of a blooming rose. The sun caught the warmth in Isabella's hair and the serene joy on her face as she watched the baby. In that moment, something inside Lorenzo shifted and clicked into place with a finality that left no room for doubt. This was not gratitude. This was not mere affection. This was a love so deep and overwhelming it felt like a fundamental truth he had been blind to his entire life. He loved her gentle spirit, her unwavering faith, the peace she brought to his son, and the light she had kindled in his own darkened soul. He waited until evening, after Gabrielle had been put to bed and the house was wrapped in its new, comfortable quiet. He found Isabella tidying the kitchen, her movements efficient and calm. "Isabella," he said, his voice unusually soft. "Walk with me in the garden." She looked up, a slight question in her eyes, but she wiped her hands on her apron and followed him. The moon was full, casting a silvery light over the paths and flowerbeds. They walked in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the crunch of gravel under their feet and the distant chirping of crickets. He stopped and turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. Her hands were small and work-roughened, but they felt right nestled in his. "Isabella," he began again, his voice thick with emotion. "You have done more than care for my son. You have cared for me. You walked into this house of shadows and you brought the sun with you. You found my heart, a stone buried in the cold ground, and you have made it live and beat again. I love you. Marry me. Let me build a life with you, a real life. Be my wife." Isabella's eyes shimmered with unshed tears in the moonlight. A smile touched her lips, a beautiful, heartbreaking smile, but it was followed by a look of profound seriousness. She did not pull her hands away, but she held his gaze with a firmness that commanded his absolute attention. "Lorenzo," she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. "My heart has been yours for longer than I knew. I love you, and I love that little boy in there as if he were my own. Nothing would make me happier than to be your wife." A wave of relief and joy washed over Lorenzo, but it was short-lived. Isabella continued, her voice gaining a gentle, unshakable strength. "But I cannot. I cannot marry the man you are now. I cannot join my life, my soul, to a world built on fear and suffering. I cannot raise Gabrielle, or any other children God may bless us with, in the shadow of that life. A family, a true family, must be built on a foundation of faith and what is good and right. To build a house on sand is to invite its collapse. I will not do that. My answer must be no, unless the man who asks me is a man who has turned away from the darkness for good." Her words hung in the night air, a clear, impossible challenge. Lorenzo felt as if the ground had fallen away beneath him. She was asking him to abandon everything he was, everything he had built. His wealth, his power, his very identity were tied to the empire he commanded. To walk away meant to become nothing, to start over with empty hands. It meant facing the wrath of the men he had led and the enemies he had made. It was a price that seemed unimaginable. He released her hands and turned away, his mind a storm of conflict. The old Lorenzo, the boss, screamed that this was foolishness, that no woman was worth this sacrifice. He could command her to stay. He could use his power to keep her. But as he stood there, the memory of her words from weeks ago returned to him. We just have to stop being too angry to see him. He had been angry for so long. Angry at God, at the world, at his son, at himself. That anger had been the fuel for his dark empire. Isabella was offering him a way out of that anger, but the cost was everything. He spent the entire night pacing the floors of his silent study. He looked at the ledger books that detailed his ill-gotten gains. He looked at the weapons locked in a cabinet, symbols of the fear he instilled. He thought of Gabrielle's future. Did he want his son to inherit this? A legacy of blood and fear? Or did he want to give him the legacy Isabella spoke of, one of faith, and goodness, and peace? As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, a profound clarity settled over him. The power he held was an illusion. It had not saved Chiara. It had not comforted his son. It had only built him a gilded cage. The real strength, he realized, was having the courage to walk away from it all for the chance at a true, honest life. As the household began to stir, he went to find Isabella. She was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, her face pale and her eyes red, as if she too had not slept. She looked at him, bracing for his anger, for his dismissal. He stood before her, a new resolve etched on his face. "You are right," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I have been building on sand my whole life. I will leave it. All of it. I will find an honest trade. It will not be the life of wealth you have here, it will be humble, but it will be good. It will be built on the foundation you described. I will become a man worthy of your yes." A sob of pure joy escaped Isabella's lips, and the tears she had been holding back finally fell. She rushed into his arms, and he held her tightly, feeling as if he had finally, after a long and terrible journey, come home. They were married a month later in a small, simple chapel, with Matteo and a few others who had remained loyal standing as witnesses. Gabrielle, now a happy, babbling toddler, sat on Matteo's lap, and when Isabella knelt to pray after exchanging their vows, the little boy reached out a hand and placed it on her head, as if bestowing his own blessing. The ceremony was not one of grandeur, but of profound promise, a sacred vow between two people and the God who had brought them together, to build a new life from the ashes of the old. The grand mansion on the hill was now but a memory, a place of shadows they had willingly left behind. In its stead, Lorenzo and Isabella now made their home in a small, sturdy house nestled on the edge of the town, its whitewashed walls bright in the sunlight and its garden bursting with the flowers Isabella lovingly tended. The air here was different. It was light, filled with the simple, honest sounds of life, the chatter of neighbors, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer, the cheerful song of birds nesting in the eaves. This was a life built not on fear, but on the sweat of one's brow and the quiet rhythm of daily gratitude. Lorenzo, once a man who commanded with a glance, now worked with his hands. He had apprenticed himself to a master furniture maker, a kind and patient man who saw in Lorenzo a fierce determination to learn. His large, powerful hands, once used for intimidation, now learned the delicate art of joining wood, of sanding a surface until it was as smooth as silk, of following the grain to reveal the hidden beauty within. He came home each evening with sawdust in his hair and the clean, honest smell of cedar and pine on his clothes, a tired but profound satisfaction in his eyes that all the wealth in his previous life could never have purchased. Gabriel flourished in this new world. No longer a sorrowful baby, he was a sturdy, bright-eyed boy with a head of dark curls and an endless curiosity. He followed Isabella around their small home, his little voice a constant stream of questions about the world. He called her Mama with a natural ease that filled her heart to overflowing. In the evenings, he would sit on the floor of the workshop, playing with the scraps of wood Lorenzo would save for him, watching his father with a look of pure admiration. The chasm that had once existed between father and son was now bridged by shared laughter, by Lorenzo patiently showing him how to hold a tool, by the simple, profound act of being present. The ghost of Chiara was no longer a source of pain in their home, but a cherished memory, a beautiful portrait that hung on the wall, her gentle smile seeming to bless the new family that honored her so dearly. The greatest test of their new faith and their newfound peace arrived with the gentle swelling of Isabella's waist. The news that she was with child brought a joy that was tempered with a silent, unspoken fear that hung in the air between them, a fear they dared not give voice to. Lorenzo would sometimes wake in the night, his heart pounding, reaching for Isabella just to feel the steady, reassuring rhythm of her breathing. The memory of his first wife, of the life that had been extinguished in the very act of bringing forth new life, was a shadow that not even the bright sun of their new life could completely erase. Isabella, feeling his anxiety, would take his hand and place it on her growing belly, where the tiny, fluttering kicks of their unborn child were a tangible promise of life. "We must trust," she would whisper into the darkness. "We are not who we were. Our story is different now." Together, they would pray, their voices soft in the night, handing their fear and their hope over to God, asking for a safe delivery and the strength to accept whatever path lay before them. The day finally came on a bright spring morning. The midwife, a calm and capable woman from the town, was summoned, and the small house was filled with a tense, expectant energy. Lorenzo paced the garden, his prayers a silent, desperate mantra. Every cry from inside the house made him flinch, sending him back to that terrible day in the mansion, a day of loss and shattered dreams. The hours stretched on, an eternity of waiting. He could hear the midwife's steady, encouraging voice and Isabella's own, strong and determined, whispering prayers between waves of pain. Then, cutting through the tension, came a new sound. It was not a cry of anguish, but the strong, healthy, indignant wail of a newborn. The door to the bedroom opened, and the midwife stood there, her face wreathed in a warm smile. "You have a daughter," she said. "And both mother and child are well." Lorenzo entered the room, his legs feeling weak. Isabella lay in the bed, tired but radiant, a sheen of sweat on her brow and a light of triumphant joy in her eyes. In her arms, swaddled in a soft, white blanket, was their daughter. She had a tiny, perfect face, a dusting of fine hair, and a rosebud mouth. Lorenzo knelt by the bed, his large, work-roughened hand trembling as he reached out to gently stroke the baby's cheek. The flood of emotion that washed over him was so powerful it stole his breath, a crushing wave of relief, an overwhelming love for this new little soul, and a profound, soul-deep gratitude for the woman who had fought to bring her safely into the world. He looked at Isabella, his eyes brimming with tears that he did not try to hide. "You have given me everything," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. They named their daughter Rosa, for the flower that symbolized love and the new beauty that had blossomed from the thorns of their past. As the days turned into weeks, the small house settled into a new, busier rhythm. Gabrielle was fascinated by his little sister, always asking to hold her tiny hand, speaking to her in a soft, protective tone. Lorenzo would often come home to find Isabella sitting in a chair by the fireplace, nursing Rosa, while Gabrielle sat at her feet, quietly looking at a picture book. The scene was one of perfect, domestic contentment. One such evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Isabella gathered the children. Lorenzo sat in his own chair, watching as she held Rosa in one arm and opened her well-worn Bible with the other. Gabriel curled up beside her, his head resting against her shoulder, listening intently as she began to read the story of the prodigal son, a tale of a lost soul finding his way home. Lorenzo listened to the gentle cadence of her voice, a sound more beautiful to him than any music. He looked around the room, at his son, his daughter, his wife, the simple, honest home they had built together. This was the true empire. This was the forever after he had never dared to dream of. He had traded a kingdom of fear for a small house filled with love, and in doing so, he had gained the entire world. And so, dear reader, the story of Lorenzo and Isabella shows us that no matter how dark the past, a new dawn is always possible through faith, love, and the courage to change. Their journey reminds us that the greatest treasures are not gold or power, but the peace found in a simple home and a loving family. If this tale of a second chance and a love built on faith has touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you will ensure you never miss another story that shines a light in the darkness, reminding us all that with God, every ending can be the start of a beautiful new beginning.